Hi everyone, welcome to Sentry's AMA livestream today. If you've ever experienced application performance problems and have spent too much time poking around in your code, seeing what's causing it, then you're in the right place today. Today we have our engineers who are building Sentry's performance monitoring product on the line, and they'll be sharing how to use Sentry to pinpoint and solve your critical app performance issues immediately. As I intro the team, please also feel free to intro yourself in the chat. You can say where you're located, the company that you work at, and anything else you want to share. So I'm your host, Linda, from the product marketing team. And today I'll also invite Alex, George, and Albert onto the stream to quickly introduce themselves.
Everyone, my name is Alex Gillard. I am the engineering manager on the performance team.
My name is George Gritsuk. I'm one of the senior engineers on the performance team.
I'm Albert Lamb. I'm the product manager for performance.
Awesome. Great. It's awesome to have all of you here today. And just to quickly go over the agenda for today as well. In this live stream, we'll have Alex give a quick intro about how our performance issues feature works. Then George will go through a live demo of how you can solve a performance issue, from installation of the SDK all the way down to resolution. Then we'll open up the floor for Q&A with the team. But in the meanwhile, please feel free to drop in any questions you have in the YouTube chat as we go along. And before I hand off, just a quick overview of why performance issues may be valuable to you. So here at Sentry, we don't think you need a PhD in your APM tool to understand the performance of your application. Our approach is threefold. One, it's very actionable, meaning that you can get immediately notified about issues that you can actually fix. Two, it's affordable at scale. And three, we're actually built for the developer. So we're here to help those who write the code to find and fix latency issues. And it's very easy also to set up our performance with just 5 lines of code. So that first piece, the actionability, is where our performance issues feature comes in. So as part of our performance offering, our performance issues feature enables developers to reduce their manual troubleshooting efforts. So now you'll get alerted on the exact critical performance issue you want to know about in your code that's causing the slowdown. You can also quickly take action in your issues feed. Instead of digging through event data for the problem, you can triage, assign, and resolve directly from the feed. And you'll be able to get to the root cause of the performance issue faster with a focus span tree. So at the end of the day, this product feature is getting you to faster time to value, which you'll be able to see live in the demo later. But for now, let me first pass on to Alex to talk about the core problem that we're solving for and how performance issues works.
Thanks, Linda. So talk a little bit about performance monitoring today with Sentry. Currently, we do a pretty good job at Sentry of collecting and surfacing important performance data for you, but it does take a lot of time and experience to sift through the dashboards and metrics to discover real performance problems. And even when you find a problem, it can still be difficult to know what the root cause is or how the problem should be prioritized. So what if all that data and deep diving and analysis was done for you by Sentry? What if we told you exactly what was going wrong, just like we did for errors? That was our main goal with performance issues, and that's the future of Sentry's performance monitoring platform. So how does Sentry Performance Issues works? Once your project has been set up with performance monitoring, which, like Linda has already said, is just a few lines of code in addition to the default SDK setup, and you're sending transactions to Sentry, we begin to analyze the spans contained within each transaction, looking for potential performance issues. If a performance problem is detected and happens with enough frequency to be impactful to your applications and ultimately your users, we group all of those events together that share a similar root cause, and then we add in any additional evidence or correlated data and present it in your issues feed as a performance issue. Our goal is to raise the most impactful problems that your users are actually experiencing based on real-world data rather than synthetic tests or problems that you might see on your local development machine. So when you see a performance issue in your feed, you can be confident that fixing it will actually have a positive impact on your users. All of the typical issue management and notification systems that exist for errors are also available for performance issues. And as a final bonus for performance issues, even though they show up in your issues feed alongside your errors, they don't impact your error quota. That's really important to remember that. They don't impact any other quotas either. If you're sending transactions to Sentry, you get performance issues, no quotas, no extra costs. And with that summary, I'll pass it on to George for a demo.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. So I'm going to do an end-to-end demo for you. I'm going to show you an app I'm working on. I'm going to get Sentry set up. I'm going to cause a performance regression. Sentry will catch it for me. It'll help me diagnose it, and I'll fix it. So you see the whole thing happen end to end. So to start, this is the app I'm working on. It's called Bookly. It's a very simple app. It has a books database, it has an authors database, and it has exactly one page, which is the home page. And all it does is show a random selection of books on every refresh. It's a Ruby on Rails app. It's very simple, just have one controller and one route. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set up Sentry. So this is a very straightforward process. I'm going to go to Sentry, Projects, Create Project. I'll select Ruby on Rails because it's a Rails app. I'm going to give it a name, call it Bookly, press Create Project. And now I have to follow these instructions. This is very simple. There are only 2 steps. The first thing I need to do is install the dependency. So I'm going to go to my gem file, which if you're not a Ruby developer, this is kind of the equivalent of package.json or a cargo file or something similar. And the second thing I need to do is copy paste this little bit of code into a file called initializers/sentry.rb. Just going to do that really quickly, sentry.rb, paste, save. This configures the Sentry SDK for errors and for performance all at the same time. You don't have to worry about anything else. I'm going to go back to my terminal. I'm going to cancel out of my dev server. I'm going to run bundle, which will install the dependency. That's done, and I'm going to restart my server, bin/rails-s. That should be all good. I'm going to refresh the app again, just to make sure it's still working. Give it a second, it loads. And I can actually verify that Sentry is working because when I go to the Sentry Rails logs, I can see that it's sending an envelope with items transaction to Sentry. So Sentry is now set up. It's good to go. We are ready. So that's step 1 complete. Step 2, let's make some code changes. Let's say that some user feedback comes in and the users are confused because this book list doesn't have the author names. So I agree with that. I think we should add the author names. So let's go ahead and do that. In Rails, it is very, very simple. I'm going to find the HTML template for this homepage. This is it right here. Has the heading, subheading, has a list of books. And for every item in the list, it shows the title. It is as simple as typing %equals book.author.name. I happen to know this because this is how my models are set up. I'm going to give that a save, go back to my web app and refresh. Give it a second to load, and there you have it. The book authors are right there. If I refresh a couple more times, you can see that this all works really well, no problem at all. In Rails, this is a very, very simple change. So as far as I'm concerned, it looks like job well done. Maybe I'll add a by here. It's a little clearer. So everything is working well. However, those of you who are very eagle-eyed or very experienced with Rails may have noticed that I actually just introduced a huge major performance regression to this page. And the page will be much, much slower than it was before. And I can actually prove this to you because if I go to my email inbox, I will have gotten an email that looks just like this. This is an email from Sentry to alert me that I just created a new performance issue in my application called an N+1 query. So let's take a look at that. When I click on the issue details, I end up on the issue details page for this issue that was just created for me. What this is telling me is that there's an issue called an N+1 query in the books controller in the index route. So there is some kind of repeated query here. So let's take a look. If I scroll down, the span evidence section tells me what I need to know. The transaction where this is happening is books controller index. The parent span is the books controller index route. The preceding span is a query that selects books from books and orders by random. That should look familiar. This is a random selection of books. And there are 10 repeated spans. So there are 10 repeated queries that select authors from authors where the author ID is some number. This should also look at least a little bit familiar because we are looping over books and fetching their authors. And if I scroll down just a little bit more, you'll see the span tree that Linda was talking about. This is a focused span tree where you can see the telltale sign of an N+1 query. There is a waterfall of queries, each one almost exactly the same as the previous one. And here, each one takes about 200 milliseconds. 10 times 200, this is about 2 seconds. This is very slow. This is a huge performance problem. If I look at the queries, you see that they are loading authors one by one with ID 53, one with ID 68, so on and so forth. This is, of course, really, really inefficient. It would be much more efficient if Rails loaded all of these at the same time in one query. So this is a significant problem. I'm going to go ahead and assign it to myself. I should absolutely fix this. This is really bad. So let's go back to the app and fix this. Luckily, in Rails, it is about as easy to fix this issue as it is to cause it. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually go to the console really quickly and look at the logs. And you can see that these queries are actually also visible here. So I can verify that this is indeed a problem that's happening. Here are all the queries, all 10 of them. Yes, this is a big issue. Let's fix it. I'm going to go back to my code, and I'm going to add just one little bit of code that fixes the issue. I have to type .includes author and add that to the ORM line. In Rails, this instructs Rails to prefetch the related authors ahead of time and do it all in one query. And I can also prove that this works. I'm going to go ahead and save. I'm going to go back to my app, give it a reload. That looks good. And if I go back to the terminal, to the Rails console, I can see the solution is here. Instead of the 10 queries, now there's just one. It loads all the authors all at the same time and passes all 10 IDs in just one query, which is a lot faster. I can actually also, if I was so inclined, and I often am, verify this in Sentry itself. So I'm going to go back and I'm actually going to look at the transaction where this is happening. So this is the index transaction. And if I go to all events, because this is a brand new endpoint, there's a lot of information here. Sorry, not a lot of information here because it's brand new. I can see both good and bad events. So this is an example right here of one of the bad events. You can see the waterfall where the issue is visible. And if I reload the page here a couple more times, wait for data to come in, you will also be able to see one of the good transactions, even though we have already verified it. So if I am at this point satisfied that the solution is correct, which I could by looking at the events, or maybe if I'm paying attention to metrics really closely, I can look at my graphs and you'll see that in a realistic application, the duration of the transaction would have decreased over time. Once I'm satisfied that the solution is correct, I can go back here, I can mark it resolved, and sort of happily go on my merry way. So this is, now the issue is solved, the performance is right back to normal, and all is well. And this should illustrate kind of the end-to-end life cycle of how a problem is caused, how Sentry detects it, how it alerts you about it automatically, and how you can fix the error, diagnose it, and then mark it complete and go through the whole life cycle. And the cool thing about this is that Sentry is doing for you what is kind of impossible for you to do, which is look at all your transactions. In reality, performance issues are almost never this simple. They often happen to just a subset of your users or in weird conditions. So they're very, very hard to track down, and Sentry can do this for you because it can look at all of your transactions. So in this case, it saw the error, it grouped all the events together, it alerted me, and it gave me all the information I needed to solve it, which is great. And the other cool thing is that this is just one example of a performance issue. An N+1 query is kind of a canonical issue. It's well known in the field, but there are others as well. I'm actually going to show you a couple, if you just give me 1 second. We're working on, I think, 7, if I'm not mistaken, different detectors, which is great because they all detect a completely different type of issue, which is really, really useful. So I can actually show you one more right now. 1 second. This is called a large render blocking asset. This is another issue detector type. This is actually a front-end detector, and it detects large assets, JavaScript or CSS, that delay the first contentful pane of your page. The span evidence explains this. There's a resource script, which is a JavaScript asset. It's delaying FCP by almost a second, which is pretty major. and its duration, in fact, is 25%. So this one span is taking up 25% of the page load, which is huge. It means that if you improve this by making the span asynchronous or deferring its load in some way, you would have a major impact on your page load, which is really, really important. And you can kind of focus on these meaningful metrics. Another example of an issue is slow DB query. This is also a different detector, and this detects queries that are consistently slow. This is another good example. The span evidence also tells you what you need to know. The /products transaction has a slow query selecting star from products that takes 7 seconds, which is 99% of the transaction. So this one query is responsible for basically all the slowness in the page, which means that if you were to fix it, you would get huge benefits and your users would have much better performance. So those are just 3 examples of performance issues that we're working on. There are lots of these detectors out there that we've built in the past little while, and we're working on more. So there's more to come. And that's the end of my demo. Sorry, Linda, you're muted.
Thank you. Great. Thank you so much for that, George, and also for prompting me. It was great to see you go through the live demo of the M+1 query. And what you see now on the screen is that in addition to that, as George mentioned, we have several other performance issue types that we are able to detect as well. So currently, we have 3 front-end issues that may be useful if you care about improving end-user experience and measuring web vitals like page load speed, for example. And these performance issue types are the large render blocking asset, uncompressed asset, and M+1 API call today. And we also have 3 backend issues that we're currently detecting that are probably quite relevant if you care about decreasing your database overhead from slow queries. And reducing resource consumption. So these are the slow database query, the MN+1 database query or M+1 database query, and the consecutive database query. And we also have a mobile performance issue that we're detecting right now, file I/O on main thread, that may be relevant if you care about minimizing time to user interaction to prevent poor user experience. That being said, we're still in the process of coming out with new issue types as well. So for the most up-to-date list of performance issues, definitely check out the link below / on the screen for a consolidated list of the performance issues that we are detecting. Great. And with that, now let's transition into the Q&A section. So I'll bring everyone back onto the screen as well. So let's add George, Albert, and Alex. And we saw that some of you have questions in the chat, which is awesome. And we also have some registrants who have dropped in questions prior to the live stream as well. So let's maybe try to get through those first. So first, we have a question about, does performance issues impact my quotas? And this was asked by a few different people in advance.
The answer to that is no. There is no impact to quotas. If you send transactions, you get performance issues for free as a result of that.
Perfect. Short and simple. We love it. The next question that was asked a few times as well is, do I need transactions to use performance issues, and how do I get them?
Yes, transactions are necessary. So if you are not sending transactions today, like George showed in his demo, all you have to do is add a tiny bit of configuration. The docs, I believe, have been linked a few times already. So as long as that configuration is set, your app will send transactions. It's a handful of lines of code. And once transactions comes in, we can detect issues for you.
Great, thank you. We also have a question from a few users about, do I need to turn on error tracking and performance monitoring separately?
I can quickly answer this one. If you have a brand new project, the documentation will give you setup instructions that will set up both at the same time. You don't have to do anything separate. If you've been with Sentry for a while for error tracking, you may need to add just a little bit of extra configuration to your SDK config to make sure that things are working. If you've been with Sentry for a really long time and haven't updated your SDK in a while, You might have to update the SDK if it's been a while, but it shouldn't be anything complicated. So it should be pretty straightforward.
Perfect. Thank you. Cool. Our next question is from one of our customers, Brad, and he asked, what is the difference between performance and profiling? This is a good question.
Yeah, so I can start the answer, and maybe George or Albert, you can jump in and fill in any gaps that I missed. But major difference is level of detail right now. So performance will give you kind of broad metrics about how long things take. It will point you in the direction of where problems exist. Profiling is much more detailed. It'll break down durations and timing information for specific functions, lines of code, smaller, more detailed blocks. But at a high level, they're actually kind of the same thing. They're both performance products. They both tell you where problems exist and how to fix them. Again, just different level of granularity.
Yeah, just to add to that a little bit, I think that overview is like really spot on, where performance is lightweight and high level, and it's focused on metrics and giving you general information about the kinds of things your application is doing, where it's spending time. Whereas profiles are much more heavy and in depth. It's more expensive to get them. It's more complicated to look through them. But the two things kind of come together, and you can use profiling to supplement performance, to add to it, to enrich it, to give you more detailed data about what your application is doing.
That's great. And we can also add in some documentation in the chat if you're curious about how profiling itself works too. And we can check it out here. Great. So the next question that was submitted by Jagosh is, are there any downsides in performance to using Sentry for performance monitoring?
Not really. There is a technical amount of overhead that does exist when you add Sentry SDK, but it is extremely minimal. The SDK development teams here at Sentry are very sensitive to adding any features that will impact performance of customer applications. So answer is yes, there's a slight downside in your performance to using Sentry SDK. However, that is extremely minimal and not enough for us to make a performance issue out of it. So if you're fixing your N+1s and your slow DB queries, those are the big impactful things, not the SDK.
Yeah, just jump in here. You might be using a bunch of visibility tools where you're sending a lot of stuff and all that overhead adds up. And especially if you have a really large application with tons of customers, like these small things really add up. So what we would recommend at that point is sample your data so that you're not sending it for everything that happens on your application, because that would just be way too much. And that's another way to manage that overhead if you get to a really large scale where that really matters. But generally, for most people, it shouldn't matter.
Yeah, and one more thing on that front is that, as Alex said, the SDK team is very sensitive to this, and they will address performance concerns and even bundle size concerns for the JavaScript SDK. They're very good about that. So if you have any specific concerns about performance, send them our way. We'll be happy to take a look and look into that.
Great, thank you. Next, we have Ashish, who asked a question about, do we have support for the PHP Yi2 framework?
So based on quick Googling literally right now, it looks like YII have their own Sentry adapter that they wrote. It looks like YII 3 is supported. I'm wondering if maybe there's support for version 2 as well. I'm not sure. So there's something out there. And if not, there's always just PHP integration, which should send at least some amount of information over. So it looks like there is something.
Great. Thanks so much for answering that, George. We also have Bright in the chat, and he asks, what will he suggest is the best way to make more sense of a JavaScript error, specifically in React? So, for example, having JavaScript errors that is actionable?
Yeah, it's a good question. This is a really big topic because it depends on what kind of problems you're seeing. I think the first steps to making sure that errors are actionable is to make sure that things like source maps are set up so that they can link you to your actual code. And that is always a huge difference maker to helping fix errors. Also, when looking at errors, making sure to look around the UI to look at all the information available, to look at the tags that are there, to look at other events that exhibit the problem, try to gather as much information as possible. Always goes a really long way towards making actionable React errors. And there are also some small things just to double check, make sure you have the most up-to-date SDK. That is often helpful because it's always being improved. I think those are like a couple first steps to make sure that errors are actionable. If you're asking about performance errors in React, that's a different situation, and also a really good question. That topic is truly huge. React performance is really difficult to narrow down because there are so many different performance concerns, and Sentry's performance detectors try to address some of the more general ones regarding to, for example, assets that block first contentful paint. And hopefully in the future, we can even get browser profiling, and then you'll have actionable issues of what the code is doing. So I think addressing performance errors and performance problems in React is a really wide-ranging topic. I recommend making sure all this stuff is up to date, and if you can, instrumenting, making sure you have lots of instrumentation. Manual instrumentation is always an option that you can fall back to add more information to what you're sending to Sentry and to help you debug. So I'd say, get as much context as you can, and the more you have, the easier it will be to fix whatever problems you're working on.
Great. And George, do you mind explaining a little bit about what instrumentation actually is for the folks that may not know?
Yeah, absolutely. So specifically, Sentry does a pretty good job of, I would say it does a really good job actually, of instrumenting automatically whatever it can, which means that when you plug Sentry into, say, Ruby on Rails, it will automatically detect your queries, your controllers, and so on and so forth, right? It's like it automatically gathers that information. For frameworks like Rails, this is a lot harder. So it can only gather so much. It can gather your resources, your AJAX calls, and a couple other things, but there are some things it doesn't know about, like it can't necessarily know about what components you're rendering in what order. Manual instrumentation is an option you have in all SDKs to manually tell Sentry, this is something that's happening. Maybe this is a query you're interested in. Maybe this is a component that you want to track. And it's a way for you to wrap your code to let Sentry know to specifically send this information over so you can analyze it in the UI. So manual instrumentation lets you customize what information is sent to Sentry.
Yeah, just going to jump in there. A use case that I've seen a lot of is if you have a really long running span and you have no visibility as to what's actually happening within that span, you can use manual instrumentation to kind of break that up to give you a little bit more clarity. Profiling offers that, but profiling is also not offered for every SDK out the door right now. So that is the kind of hack to get around that. And then if we didn't answer those React errors, please join us on GitHub. Give us like a specific example, and we'd be happy to look at that together with you. And maybe we can come up with a new performance issue detector.
Awesome. Yes, definitely feel free to reach out and put your thoughts in that GitHub discussion, or reach out to us on other forums like Discord as well. And we're happy to engage with you there further. Great. In the interest of time, we have another question from Mike. He says, I blew through my 2 million transaction quota in around 5 days. Oh no, need to set up a sampling function. So do we have any thoughts here on how maybe he can do that?
Yeah, for every SDK, we have an initialization option when you set it up that you can set. I believe it's typically traces sample rate. That will just set a flat sampling rate across all transactions that happen, and you can take your 2 million transaction quota and spread it out over the month. A little bit of pretty simple math there. And that will help ensure that you have consistent data all month long, and you'll be able to see if any new issues come up as you're deploying code.
Seeing the 2 million set of transactions, your application sounds like it's pretty big. Another strategy that I've seen people use is identify parts of the application where you're less interested in monitoring the performance so that you can reserve your quota for some of the mission critical aspects of your application. You can configure the sample rate as well. That's in our docs to adjust that.
Great, thanks for that response. We also have another question now about if there any plan to actually add a MongoDB performance issues detection.
Love this question as a former MongoDB cluster operator. Yeah, that's a really good idea. I think we should definitely look into this. When we work on performance detectors, we usually don't start by targeting anything specific. We try to target all databases and see if we have to omit things. So depending on how MongoDB is instrumented, it actually might be eligible for some. But this is a really good point, and we'll take a closer look at that. I think MongoDB is definitely a really interesting technology for us to take a closer look at.
Great. We also have a question from Badal, and he asks, sometimes I get IPs instead of user emails for events, and the API trace bands gets into browser request for the front end. Is this a bug that I'm suffering from?
Hard to say at first glance. To be honest, this might be a little bit easier for us to address if you reach out through Discord or maybe through another channel. Albert, you can let us know. But this sometimes happens if there is a bug in how the SDK is initialized. That could be the problem, but I think we need just some more details before we can really answer this one definitively.
Yeah, but I'll definitely reach out to us on those channels that George mentioned, and we've been linking throughout the stream as well. And we have various engineers on the Sentry team who can jump in and help diagnose the problem for you. Great. Any other questions? Feel free to keep dropping in your thoughts in the chat if anything comes up. We'll maybe take like 30 seconds. Okay. No worries if not, but we can switch back to the stream slides for a bit. And I'll talk a little bit more just quickly about how you can learn more about how to get started with Sentry Performance. So if you want to learn more about performance issues specifically, you can check out the blog post that we have on the left side here. And in that blog post, you'll be able to actually check out all of the performance issues that were mentioned today on the call in that table that we showed, and learn a little bit more deeply about how each one works and whether they may be relevant to you and your application as well. And on the right side for this link, you can also attend an upcoming performance customer workshop. This is a workshop that we're hosting with Tild. And basically, you can see how they've been able to improve their developer productivity by using Sentry Performance Monitoring. And they'll be walking through some more best practices for how to actually configure performance, how you can trace slow HTTP requests with detailed context, and monitor your critical endpoints and third-party integrations using Sentry as well. So that might be a helpful resource to kind of flag and attend as well. And yeah, basically, we also have a survey at the end where we'd love to have you fill this out and tell us if this live stream today was helpful for you. This is definitely a new kind of format that we're trying out and experimenting with. So any thoughts and feedback is really helpful too. I think we also have another question actually in the chat that we can go through quickly. I think Lazar asked, is it possible to stop the automatic instrumentation for a certain part of the app, or only enable automatic instrumentation for a certain route and ignore the rest? So if one of the Sentry engineers wants to jump in, that'd be awesome.
I think you can accomplish this with a custom sampling function. So you can configure a flat sampling rate for performance transactions as just a number, but you can also provide a sampling function. And in that function, you can add whatever logic you want to set sampling rates to 0 for a particular set of your app, or set it to really high for other parts. So that's completely up to you. It's in your control to do whatever you like with that. So yeah, definitely possible.
Great. Perfect. And I think we have, you also asked a quick question about how would Sentry's performance product evolve in the future. I don't know if we want to like discuss some thoughts that we have here as well. I can remove the screen quickly, but I know Alex, Albert, George all might have some different thoughts on this. So if you want to just quickly weigh in, I think that might be a great way to kind of close the stream as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So Albert, you go ahead.
That's my bread and butter to think about the future of this product. I mean, as Alex mentioned, like we've spent the last 3 years working really hard in getting all that performance data in and the visualizations into the UI. But the biggest pain point that we see is like you're presented with so many dashboards, so much information. It's actually quite difficult to wade through. Sometimes it's too high level for you to care. Sometimes it's too low level for you to actually see the impact of it. So moving forward, we're trying to draw more insights right off the bat. So like actionable insights. Performance issues was one way we're thinking about accomplishing this, but also detecting trends in your metrics like inflection points or populations that are experiencing a P99 slowness. These are some of the things that you could expect later in the year. But jump in on your thoughts too, Alex.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that we're really looking to try and get more proactive in our detection of these issues. The less time you have to wait to find out that your users are having a bad time, the better. So we are working to move the detection as close to real time as possible, and eventually, way further down the road, potentially even pre-deploy time when we can get into code analysis and other things like that.
Love that. Great. Always excited to hear more about how we're thinking about performance. And it's great that we can share that out with everyone as well. So actually, while you were discussing as well, we got another quick question from Toby, who says, besides N+1 queries, he's asking, what is another example of a performance problem Sentry can help me identify?
Yeah, good question there, Toby. So right now we have 7 detectors that will create performance issues for you. Render blocking asset is a good one to highlight on the front end. Anytime that you're loading a large asset that is preventing the page from actually rendering your largest contentful paint, that tends to be a frustrating experience for users if that drags on too long. Those are the things that people see as the site's not working, the site's really slow, causes them to just leave and go somewhere else, right? So that would be a great one that is applicable to essentially any application with a front end, which is most of them. So that is probably the one that I would say. George, Albert, don't know if you have other input there.
I think depending on who you talk to at Sentry, everyone has like a favorite performance issue detector. The one that I actually really think is really cool is file.io on main thread. This is a detector for mobile applications. In mobile context, the main thread is usually responsible for rendering the UI. So if you do really heavy file.io on the main thread, it locks the main thread, and it's a huge performance problem because it just like locks UI in most cases. And it's like a really easy thing to do by accident. So this issue detector will catch this case and like let you know, so that you can move file.io to a different thread, which is usually pretty straightforward to do. So I like that issue detector a lot because it's something very specific. It's something very impactful. And it's like really easy to action, and it results in a much better experience for anybody who has that issue. That's one that I personally like a lot. So yeah, there's a couple cool ones.
We're also working on a lot of new issues upcoming as well that have not been released yet. That is kind of related to the last question, how will the performance product evolve? We're going to be adding a bunch of new detectors, a bunch of new issue types. One of them that will be coming is consecutive HTTP I/O, where you're making API calls or other HTTP calls in serial, and they can be switched into a parallelized fashion, reducing kind of the overall time that set of calls take. So that's another one that could potentially apply to the back end as well as front end. Wherever you're making these calls, we will work to detect them where they happen.
That being said, if you have any common performance problems that you face from role to role, different applications, please share those stories with us, because we'd love to hear that and be able to catch those automatically for you moving forward, so they don't catch you or your customers by surprise.
Yeah, I feel like this is a small brag, but I think it's so important. Almost all the detectors that we work on were inspired by things that we saw in the field. So a couple of the more recent ones were all made by seeing an issue in performance in the Sentry code base, capturing that trace, and then writing a detector that detects exactly that issue. So we're able to see issues, fix them for ourselves and for everybody else who has them. So yeah, the more real world cases we have and examples we have, the better of a job we can do with detection. So yeah, if you have ideas, we would love nothing more than to hear them, because that's how we make these.
Amazing. Love that. I think we had just one last question. Someone said, looking at the docs, we followed the instructions, but we don't have a performance section showing. Does this have something to do with the SDK version potentially?
Possibly SDK version. We are also, I believe, one of the teams here at Sentry is running an A/B test on the label for the performance product. So it might show up as APM right now in the sidebar rather than performance. So take a look for that too. If that's not the case and your SDK is already up to date, then find us in Discord and we can help sort out what might be going wrong here.
Great. Thanks for answering that. It's great to have all of you have joined us today. We really appreciate all of your time. And as I mentioned before, please do fill out this survey. It's super short, and we'd love to hear your thoughts about what you liked and what you might like to see a little bit different for next time. And also, I really wanted to also thank George, Albert, and Alex for being here and being so great. Love to see all of your engagement in the chat, and thank you again for everything. Take good care. Bye all.